The mountains were wrapped in quiet when Emily woke on their last morning at the cabin. Frost glazed the edges of the porch railing, and the air that drifted through the cracked window carried the crisp bite of early spring. She slipped into her sweater and padded softly into the kitchen, careful not to wake Daniel. The cabin smelled faintly of wood smoke from last night's fire. Emily poured herself a cup of coffee, then stepped outside. The sky was a pale blue canvas, the sun just beginning to rise behind the peaks. She held the mug close, letting the steam curl against her face, and breathed in the stillness. She had always loved mornings like this, the kind where the world seemed brand new, untouched and waiting. But now her heart carried a restlessness that unsettled her. Daniel's words from the night before still lingered. "You deserve joy. You deserve love." Emily pressed her lips to the rim of the mug. She wanted to believe him, but believing meant risking her heart all over again. And after losing Mark, she wasn't sure she had the courage to open herself to that kind of pain. The sound of the cabin door, creaking behind her, made her turn. Matthew stepped onto the porch, his boots scuffing lightly against the wood. He carried his own mug, his movements unhurried, as though he had been part of mornings like this all his life. "Early riser?" he asked, his voice low. "Calm." Emily smiled faintly. "Habit, couldn't sleep." He nodded, standing beside her at the railing. For a while they said nothing, both gazing out at the valley below where a thin layer of fog hovered like a secret. The mountains weren't ready to give up. Finally, Matthew spoke. His tone was steady, careful, like a man choosing each word with thought. "I know Daniel brought me here for reasons he maybe should have explained sooner, and I don't want you to think I'm here to take advantage of that. Truth is, Emily, I almost didn't come." She glanced at him, surprised. "Why?" "Because I know how deep loss cuts," he said quietly. "And I know it's not something you just move past. It changes you. And I figured the last thing you needed was someone showing up at your cabin door. It's complicating things." Emily's breath caught. There was honesty in his words, a kind of respect that steadied her racing thoughts. "So why did you come?" she asked softly. Matthew turned his mug in his hands, staring at the rising steam. "Because your son asked me to. And because he wasn't wrong." Emily's heart tightened. "Wasn't wrong about what?" He looked at her then, his gaze steady but gentle. "That you've been carrying more than anyone should carry alone. That you deserve to have someone walk beside you again." The words hung between them, fragile as glass. Emily gripped the railing, unsure if she was ready to hear this, let alone believe it. Yet there was no pressure in his tone, no demand, just an open door. "I don't want to rush you," Matthew continued. "I don't expect anything from you. All I want is for you to know. If you ever need a hand to hold, a voice to talk to, or just someone to sit with in the quiet, I'd be honored to be that person." Emily blinked back tears, overwhelmed. For years she had longed for companionship, for the simple comfort of another presence beside her. But she had buried those longings deep, convincing herself they were selfish, even dangerous. And yet here was this man, offering her exactly that without pressure, without conditions. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I'm ready." Matthew gave a small smile. "Then we don't have to rush. Life isn't about being ready. It's about taking one step when you're able. I'm not asking for forever. I'm just asking if you'd let me walk beside you for now." The simplicity of his words struck something in her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to be strong alone at that moment. The cabin door opened again, and Daniel stepped out, his hair mussed from sleep. He froze, seeing them standing together. And Emily caught the hope in his eyes. "Morning," he said cautiously, glancing between them. Emily's heart softened. She saw in her son's face the love that had brought her here, the courage that had pushed her toward this moment. He hadn't just arranged a trip. He had given her a chance at something she hadn't dared to imagine. She reached out, resting her hand over Matthew's on the railing. His fingers curled around hers gently, grounding her. Daniel's smile widened, relief flooding his features. Emily turned back toward the mountains. her chest rising with a breath that felt freer than any she had taken in years. She wasn't making promises. She wasn't rewriting her entire future. But she was allowing herself to take one small step toward hope, for the first time since Mark's passing. The ache in her heart felt lighter, not gone, but no longer suffocating. And as the morning sun broke fully over the peaks, casting golden light across the valley, Emily knew something had shifted. This trip had begun as a simple getaway, a family escape. But her son's surprise had opened a door to healing, to love, to possibility. She wasn't sure what lay ahead. But she knew this. She didn't have to face it alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter. Emily found herself laughing more than she had in years. It was strange, almost unsettling, how easily the sound slipped out of her. For so long, laughter had felt foreign, like something from another life. Yet here it was, spilling into the room like light through an open window. She caught Daniel watching her at one point. His lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. She frowned slightly, wondering what was behind that expression. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the fire burned low, Matthew excused himself. He put on his jacket and tipped his head politely toward Emily. "Thank you for letting me join." "I hope I wasn't intruding." "Not at all," Emily said quickly, though part of her still wondered how she had gone from expecting a quiet family dinner to sharing stories with a stranger. After the door closed behind him, the cabin felt different, quieter, yes, but not empty. His presence lingered in the warmth of the fire, in the echo of her own laughter. Emily turned to Daniel, folding her arms. "You invited him without telling me?" Daniel shrugged, though his eyes twinkled. "I knew you'd say no if I asked." She raised an eyebrow. "And why is that?" "Because you don't give yourself chances anymore, Mom," Daniel said softly. His words weren't accusatory, just honest. "You take care of me, you take care of work, but you don't let anyone take care of you." The statement landed heavy in the room. Emily didn't answer right away. She wasn't ready to admit how true it was. That night, lying in bed, Emily replayed the evening in her mind. The way Matthew's laughter had rumbled low and warm. The way his eyes had softened when she spoke about missing the quiet companionship of her late husband. She hadn't shared much, but somehow Matthew had understood. She pulled the blanket tight around her shoulders, torn between unease and something else, something she didn't dare name. Attraction, interest, hope. It felt impossible, even wrong, to imagine those things after everything she had lost. But as the wind whispered through the pine trees outside, Emily couldn't shake the memory of the conversation she overheard when she had gone upstairs to fetch her sweater earlier in the evening through the thin cabin walls. She had caught Daniel's voice on the porch, hushed but firm. "She deserves someone good, someone steady. I know she won't admit it, but she's lonely." And then Matthew's reply, quiet and careful, "I'll tread gently, son. I promise." Those words echoed in her heart long after she drifted into restless sleep. What had her son done? And why did a stranger's voice feel like a promise she almost wanted to believe? The mountains woke slowly the next morning, mist curling between the pines like soft ribbons. Emily stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, her mind still tangled with thoughts from the night before. Sleep hadn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Matthew's voice on the porch, quiet and steady. "I'll tread gently, son. I promise." She wrapped her hands around the warm mug, staring out the wide cabin window at the pale sky. Why would Daniel say those things? Why would he think I needed someone new? The scrape of footsteps behind her pulled her from her thoughts. Daniel, hair still messy from sleep, grinned at her as he rubbed his eyes. "Morning, Mom. Coffee smells great." Emily studied him carefully. There was something in his expression, kind of guarded excitement, that she couldn't quite place. She wanted to ask him outright about last night, about Matthew, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she said quietly, "So, are you going to explain why you invited a stranger to dinner without telling me first?" Daniel smirked, trying to look innocent. "Stranger? He's hardly a stranger. Matthew's been a friend of mine for months." Emily froze, the spoon in her hand clinking against the counter. Months. Daniel. How? He pulled out a chair sitting at the wooden table. I met him last summer. He runs the ranch near where I did my internship. I spent a lot of weekends there helping out, learning from him. He's a good man, Mom. The kind of man who's real. Know what I mean? Emily's chest tightened. She did know. But still, why bring him here? Why now? She sat across from her son, folding her arms. Daniel, what are you trying to do? For a moment, he looked like the little boy she remembered, the one who used to hide behind her legs when he was in trouble. But then his expression softened, grew serious, older than his years. I'm trying to help you, he said quietly. Mom, you've been carrying everything alone for too long. I see it in your eyes. You smile at me, but when you think I'm not looking, you're somewhere else? Lonely. Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to brush it off with a laugh. But she couldn't. Not when her son was looking at her with that kind of raw honesty. I don't need anyone, she whispered. I've managed. We've managed. Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His grip was firm, reassuring. I know you can handle everything. You've been the strongest person I've ever known. But strength doesn't mean you have to live without happiness. Dad wouldn't have wanted that for you. The mention of Mark hit Emily like a sudden wind. She looked away, blinking back tears. It had been years, but even now his absence felt like a wound that never fully closed. She missed his laughter, his steady presence, the way he had always known how to comfort her without words. Daniel. Her voice broke. I don't know if I can, if I should. Her son's hand tightened on hers. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I just wanted you to meet him. To see that maybe there's a chance for you to open your heart again. Matthew's not here by accident, Mom. I asked him because I trust him. Because he's been there for me when I needed someone to talk to. And because I think he could be there for you too. The room felt suddenly heavy with truth. Emily sat still, her heart pounding, her mind a whirlwind of memories, fears, and possibilities. She couldn't remember the last time someone had truly seen her not just as Daniel's mother. Not just as a widow managing life, but as a woman with feelings, with longings she had buried deep. But could she? Could she risk letting someone close again, knowing how fragile happiness could be? That afternoon, the three of them set out on a hiking trail. The sun filtered through the trees, casting golden light across the forest floor. Daniel walked ahead, his youthful energy pulling him forward, while Matthew stayed beside Emily, his steps steady and unhurried. Careful here, he murmured as they reached a rocky incline, offering his hand. Emily hesitated only a second before taking it. His grip was strong, grounding. She told herself it was just courtesy, just politeness. But the truth was, the warmth of his touch stirred something she hadn't felt in years. They walked in silence for a while, the sound of their footsteps mingling with the rush of a distant stream. Finally, Matthew spoke. Daniel told me a little about you, about what you've been through. Emily stiffened. Did he? Matthew's tone was gentle. He looks up to you, you know. Calls you the strongest person he knows. But I think even the strongest people need someone at their side. She glanced at him, startled. His words mirrored her son's, yet coming from him. They landed differently, like a door cracking open inside her chest by the time they returned to the cabin. The weight of the unspoken hung between them. Emily busied herself with preparing dinner, trying to ignore the way Matthew's quiet presence filled the room, the way Daniel kept sneaking glances at her as if waiting for her to admit something. That evening, as the fire flickered low, Daniel finally broke the silence. Mom, he said softly, his voice carrying the courage of someone who had rehearsed this moment, I need you to hear me. I know it's scary. I know you're afraid to let anyone close. But I don't want you to spend the rest of your life only surviving. You deserve joy. You deserve love. And I think Matthew, I think he could give you that if you'd let him. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Her son's honesty was too much, too raw. She couldn't decide whether to be angry at his boldness or touched by his devotion. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "Daniel, I don't know if I'm ready." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes tender. "You don't have to be ready now. Just promise me you won't close the door before you even look through it." The fire crackled, sending sparks upward, and in that moment Emily realized something. Her son wasn't just her child anymore. He was a man, wise beyond his years, seeing truths she had tried to bury. And his love for her was giving her a chance she hadn't dared to hope for. As she looked across the room at Matthew, who sat quietly, respectfully giving her space, Emily felt a fragile stirring inside her heart. Not certainty, not yet, but the faintest trace of hope. Emily Parker often thought of her life as divided into two chapters, before and after. Before, there had been laughter echoing through her home, a husband's warm hand reaching for hers at the dinner table, and the sense of being part of something whole. After, there was silence. There were nights when she sat alone by the window, watching the porch light glow against the darkness, and mornings when she forced a smile for her son, even though her heart felt hollow. 3 years had passed since her husband. Mark had died suddenly of a heart condition neither of them had known about. 3 years of trying to be strong, trying to keep life steady for Daniel, their only son. She had learned how to manage the bills, how to fix a leaky faucet, how to stand tall in front of friends who asked gently, "How are you holding up?" But what she hadn't learned, what she still struggled with, was how to live for herself again. Daniel, now in his early 20s, had watched all of this with a quiet maturity that sometimes broke Emily's heart. He was at that age when most young men were chasing careers or traveling with friends. Yet he seemed to stay close to her, as if he didn't want her to feel abandoned. He still called her mom in the same boyish tone he had when he was 12, though his shoulders had broadened and his voice had deepened into something steadier. So when he came home one evening in early spring with that spark in his eyes, Emily was caught off guard. "Mom," Daniel said, leaning against the kitchen counter as she stirred a pot of soup, "how would you feel about a trip? Just you and me. No work. No responsibilities. Just us." Emily turned wooden spoon in hand, blinking at him in surprise. "A trip. Daniel, you've got school and I've got." He cut her off gently, smiling. "I already checked my schedule. And you, Mom, you need this. You haven't taken time for yourself in forever." Her first instinct was to argue. Vacations were expensive. They were impractical. But something in his voice, something in the way he looked at her, made her pause. For once, it wasn't just her son speaking. Was a man who saw his mother's weariness and wanted to lift it. "Where?" she asked softly. "The mountains," Daniel said. "Colorado. I found this cabin. It's simple but beautiful. Fresh air, hiking trails, and no city noise. You'd love it." Emily felt a flutter of something she hadn't felt in years. Excitement. The thought of leaving behind the endless cycle of work and chores, even for a short while, felt almost too good to be true. That night, lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling, thinking of pine forests and starry skies. Maybe this was what she needed to breathe again, to remember that life could still hold moments of joy. She told herself it was only a family trip, nothing more. A chance to bond with her son, to step outside the walls of grief she had built around herself. The following week was a whirlwind of planning. Daniel took care of most of the arrangements, booking the cabin, checking the route, even insisting on driving the whole way. Emily busied herself with packing, folding warm sweaters, and slipping an old leather journal into her bag, telling herself she might finally find the words she hadn't been able to write since Mark's passing on the morning of their departure. Emily stood in the driveway, watching Daniel load their suitcases into the car. The sun was barely up, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. She hugged her cardigan close around her and felt the crisp edge of spring air against her cheeks. "You're too grown up for me?" she said with a smile as Daniel tossed the last bag in. He grinned, that same mischievous grin he'd had since childhood. "You'll always be the boss, Mom." As they drove away, Emily watched her hometown fade in the rearview mirror. The familiar streets, the grocery store she always went to, the little church where Mark's service had been held, all of it slowly disappeared, replaced by open roads and endless skies. She let the hum of the car soothe her. let herself imagine what awaited them in the mountains. Hours passed and they sang along to old songs on the radio. Daniel teased her about her off-key notes, and she laughed so hard her eyes watered. It felt normal. It felt like the family they used to be before loss had changed everything, when they finally reached the winding roads that led upward. Emily pressed her face to the glass like a child. The mountains rose before them, majestic and silent, their peaks dusted with snow. The pine trees stood tall, whispering in the breeze, and streams of melted ice glittered in the sunlight. "This is beautiful," she whispered. Daniel glanced at her, smiling softly. "Told you." When they pulled up to the cabin, Emily gasped. It was even lovelier than she had imagined. Wooden, rustic, with a wraparound porch that faced the mountains. Smoke curled gently from the chimney as if welcoming them in. She stepped out of the car, breathing in the crisp mountain air, feeling her lungs expand in a way they hadn't in years. For the first time since Mark's death, she felt a spark of life returning. Inside, the cabin was cozy. Stone fireplace, wooden beams, soft rugs, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of cedar. Daniel carried the bags in, humming as he went, and Emily stood in the center of it all, letting it sink in. She thought this was what the trip would be: peace, rest, and time with her son. She had no idea yet that Daniel had something else planned, something far beyond a mother-son getaway. And when she heard the knock on the cabin door later that evening, she didn't yet realize it would mark the beginning of a new chapter. The chapter she never expected. The first night in the cabin was meant to be quiet. Emily had imagined herself sitting by the fire with a book in her hands while Daniel played cards at the table. Maybe sharing hot cocoa and laughter like they had when he was a boy. After the long drive, all she wanted was rest and the comfort of being surrounded by nature. But just as she began unpacking her suitcase upstairs, she heard it a firm, steady knock on the cabin's front door. Her head lifted, startled. Out here in the mountains, who could possibly be visiting? She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearing dusk, the sky painted in soft lavender and streaks of fading gold. She expected no one. Before she could go down, she heard Daniel's voice at the door. His tone was light, almost cheerful, like he had been expecting this very thing. Emily's steps slowed on the stairs as she listened. She heard the door creak open, followed by Daniel's voice. "You made it." And then another voice, a man's, deep, steady, carrying warmth that seemed to fill the space even through the walls. "Wouldn't miss it." Emily hesitated at the foot of the stairs, her hand resting on the banister. She wasn't sure whether to stay back or step forward. Curiosity won. She moved toward the living room, her heart beating a little faster than usual. Standing at the door was a man she had never seen before. He was tall, perhaps in his 40s, with broad shoulders and a calm presence that seemed to settle the room around him. His hair was dark with hints of gray at the temples, his face rugged but kind. He wore a worn leather jacket and carried himself like someone who belonged in the mountains, not just passing through them. Daniel turned toward her, grinning. "Mom, this is Matthew Turner. He lives not too far from here. I invited him to join us for dinner tonight." Emily blinked, caught between surprise and politeness. Her instinct was to smile, though her mind spun with questions. "Invited him? Without telling me?" "Hello," she said softly, extending her hand. Matthew took it gently, his grip warm but respectful. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Parker. Emily," she corrected. Still slightly off balance. Something about his eyes unsettled her, not in a frightening way, but in how deeply they seemed to notice her, as if he could see past her careful mask of composure. Dinner that night was nothing like Emily had imagined. Instead of quiet moments and the soft crackle of the fire, there was conversation, laughter, and stories she hadn't expected. Matthew was easy to talk to. He spoke about his life as a rancher, early mornings tending to horses, long days fixing fences, the way the seasons shaped his work. He spoke with a kind of grounded strength, not trying to impress anyone, just sharing pieces of his world. And he listened, really listened. When Emily mentioned her work as a librarian, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. Books were my escape growing up, he said. Still are when I can keep my eyes open after a day on the ranch.